right, good morning. We're going to be in Exodus 12 is where we're going to start. Book of Exodus. Working our way at a snail's pace through the Bible. Okay, let's go ahead and pray. We'll get started this morning. Father, thank you for your goodness to us. And time to gather together, study your word, to fellowship with one another. Lord, I pray that you bless our time today. Help us to focus. I pray that you give us clarity as we study your word. Give us understanding. Help us see how it applies to our life. And Lord, most of all, I pray as we work through this, you'd help us to see Christ in this. Please bless our time together now in Jesus' name. Amen. So, been working through Exodus. Up to this point, we've seen that we've noted that there's three phases to Moses' life, each of them being 40 years apiece. First 40 years was Moses in the house of Pharaoh as he's being brought up in the Egyptian schooling. He's brought up with the best that really the world has to offer at that time. Is that called like having golden spoon or something like that? What do they call that with babies? They're silver spoon. There you go. So that's basically how Moses grew up. Best schools, best teachers, best everything that there was to offer. But then the Bible tells us that when he came to years, there in Hebrews chapter 11, that he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And he chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God. And so a certain point came along where Moses began, it says in Exodus, that he went to visit his people. It doesn't just mean he went by and saw them. It means that he actually left the house of Pharaoh and joined in with the Israelites as they were working. And upon seeing one of them being harassed by the Egyptian taskmasters, Moses decided this is the opportunity that I need to show the people that I am the deliverer sent by God. And so he killed the taskmaster, and it did not turn out the way that he wanted it to. And so later found out other people saw, and so he fled because he knew that it was apparently known in the house of Pharaoh. Pharaoh being upset not only at the fact that he left the home and disregarded the upbringing that he had, but also that he had now killed an Egyptian. Moses flees for his life to the land of Midian. And there in Midian, he's going to spend the next 40 years of his life as he is in the wilderness herding sheep, something every man, I'm sure, looks forward to doing. It's kind of, that's the high status in life. Can't wait till I turn 40 and then start herding sheep. But that's what Moses is doing, and it's there at the end of those 40 years that God meets him on Mount Horeb, which would be Mount Sinai, is how it's typically referred to in the Bible, and calls him to go back. Moses has gone back, bringing us to the third 40-year phase of his life, beginning in chapter 7 as he comes back to Egypt to warn Pharaoh and to call him to let the people go. And a couple weeks ago, as we went through this, we briefly looked at each of the 10 plagues that came to Egypt, and that was God's war on the Egyptian gods to prove that he was, in fact, the only true and living God. And the last one being a direct attack on all the gods of Egypt, and especially on Pharaoh. And the way he's going to, and that's the death of the firstborn. Now, what we're going to begin here in chapter 12 is with the institution of the Passover. And the Passover was God's means of protecting his people from his wrath. Because that's exactly what's going to happen with Egypt. Egypt is going to be decimated. God's wrath is going to be poured out. The firstborn are going to be wiped out in Egypt. And the only way to be preserved and to live through that is to have the blood of the Lamb. And this is where we're at here in chapter 12. And this is what affects the Exodus itself. So let's look here, chapter 12, verse number 1, it came, and the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of the souls. Every man, according to his eating, shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. Ye shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats, and ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper doorpost of the houses, wherein they shall eat it. And they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire, and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Eat not of it raw, nor sodden, that means boiled at all with water, but roast with fire his head and his legs, and with the purtenance thereof. So the purtenance, that's talking about all the organs on the inside. So they were to skin it, but that was it. After they killed it, skin it, but then they're not to open it up, they're not to clean it out, they're just to roast it whole. That's how they're supposed to do this. It says, Ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning, and that which remaineth of it until the morning ye shall burn with fire. And thus shall ye eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So at the end of this here, he says you need to have your staff, your shoes dressed, and you need to just be ready to go. Because what's going to take place after this Passover, after the death of the firstborn, Pharaoh is going to kick them out, and it's imperative that they be ready to go. Because they're not going to, it's not like they get to plan this. You know, and if you're planning to do a cross-country trip or go to another country, I would imagine it takes a little bit of planning. You know, you're going to figure out where your stops are going to be. You're going to figure out how much money you need. You're going to figure out where you're going to eat. You're going to figure out, you know, what clothes and everything like that. They don't have that. He says, you take the stuff that you got and be ready to go. Now, I want you to notice here a few things about this. First, we notice here, back in verse 2, it takes place the beginning of months. Says, This shall be the first month of the year to you. Now, this is not January like we suppose. The first month is the month of Abib, which that's the Hebrew calendar, and it corresponds to mid-March to mid-April in our calendar. So this is the beginning of springtime is when the month Abib is. Now, this is their religious calendar. One of the things that gets kind of confusing as you go through the Bible, you don't notice it all the time. It doesn't do this all the time, but there are times where it switches over to their civil calendar. And their civil calendar is based upon the creation. And so that, I believe, begins on what would be the 8th month, would be the national New Year. And so sometimes you have these two competing calendars, and it can get you messed up. So you got to be mindful of that. But this is the first month of the year. This is the beginning of the Jewish religious year. This is the first kind of holiday, the first feast that they are going to celebrate in their religious calendar for really all of time. And so it's the first month. Now, we notice here in verse number 3, the lamb is to be brought into the house, taken out of the sheepfold, brought into the house on the 10th day of the month, and it is kept for 4 days and sacrificed on the 14th day of the month. Okay? So you've got 4 days from that time. 14th is when it's sacrificed. Did you have a question? Okay. Sorry. I had two puzzled looks, and I was just, okay. So that's just the way you look, right? Okay. Thanks for the reminder. Okay. So they're brought in on the 10th, examined for 4 days, and the reason it's being examined is because it has to be a lamb without blemish. It can't have any spots on it. It has to be perfectly clean and white. No spots whatsoever. It can't have any broken bones. It can't have anything like that, it has to be a perfect, pure lamb that's brought in. And so it has to be examined for those 4 days and kept kind of stored up so it doesn't move around. You know, kids like to jump around. They have all this energy, as all of us well know. And it's the same with animals. But the problem is they get bumps and bruises when they do that. And you can't have that on the sacrificial lamb. So it had to be stored up and kept secure so nothing happens to it. And then on the 14th day, they were to kill it. So this is one of those things, and Alex and I talk about this from time to time, is how Sunday school lessons so often misrepresent the stories of the Bible. Because when you read a lesson, or you hear the lesson, or even when you see it in a movie, it looks like all this stuff is happening in rapid succession. It's not that God gave them the command and then that night they're putting blood on the doorpost. They're waiting for 4 days, at least. And there may be a couple weeks here that transpire from the time of the last plague until this 10th plague is getting ready to come. And so they're going to keep it for those 4 days. Now, the parallel here, well, it's a lamb, a male without blemish, and it's to be killed on the 14th. Now, notice here, in that gray box, Christ is our Passover. That's what 1 Corinthians chapter 5 calls him. He is our Passover. There is a parallel here to the Lord Jesus Christ himself. He is the lamb without blemish and was tested for 4 days. Now, this is important, and it's not like this part is not vital to your salvation, but this is why, you know, when it teaches through this, that we understand that Jesus, he was not crucified on a Friday. He was not crucified on a Wednesday. He was crucified on Thursday. It's the only way you get the 4 days from the time he comes into Jerusalem. He comes into Jerusalem. We typically refer to it as Palm Sunday. And from that time that he comes in, he is examined for 4 days. He comes in on Sunday, and Sunday to Monday, Monday to Tuesday, Tuesday to Wednesday, and Wednesday to Thursday. Every single day, he is in the city of Jerusalem being examined by the religious leaders of the city. And then the final examination was by Pilate. And you remember what Pilate said? I find no fault in this man. That was it. He's the one. And so, he was crucified then on Thursday and put into the tomb. And so we get 3 days and 3 nights from there. Jesus fulfilled that pattern. The lamb was killed in the even. Jesus died. The even starts at 3 o'clock, goes till 6. Jesus died at 3 o'clock when they started to offer up the first sacrificial lamb. It's a perfect parallel. After his examination, he was killed. The blood had to be applied for redemption. How are we redeemed? How do we receive the forgiveness of sins? It's through his blood, right? In whom we have redemption, for Ephesians chapter 1, verse 7. Whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins according to the riches of his grace. The blood had to be applied for redemption. The application of the blood was protection from God's wrath. It's a perfect parallel here. Now, notice here, we got time. Let's go over to 1 Corinthians. Let's go ahead and just look at that real quick. Keep your place here. We'll be back. 1 Corinthians 5. Now, 1 Corinthians 5, there's an issue of discipline that is going on within the church. Man's committing fornication. The church is not dealing with it as they should. And so Paul is reproving them for that because the church is to be holy. It's to be kept pure. And so notice down here to verse 7, this is why he's saying this. And the principle of the issue of church discipline is based on the principle of leaven. A little leaven, Paul says, leavens the whole lump. So you come down here to verse 7, he says, purge out therefore the old leaven. So this is why we discipline. This is why churches have discipline. This is why we excommunicate people, is because we want to keep the church pure. It says, purge out the old leaven that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened. For even Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. Verse 8, therefore let us keep the feast. So the Passover began the feast of unleavened bread. And so for 7 days thereafter, they were to eat unleavened bread. And they were to go through their house and purge out anything that had leaven. And that's actually where spring cleaning comes from. Because in the springtime, the Jews, in preparation for this, would go sometimes weeks ahead of time and go through every single inch of their house cleaning just to make sure there's not the slightest bit of leaven within their house. But he says here, let us keep the feast, talking about the feast of unleavened bread, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So the parallel here, just as Christ is our Passover, well, what's the parallel then for the feast of unleavened bread? It's the holiness of life. That's exactly what he says. We purge out the old leaven, that we might be a new lump. Christ, our Passover sacrifice for us, let us keep the feast, not with the old leaven of malice and wickedness. What's that talking about? That's talking about our attitudes and our lifestyle. But with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. That's talking about our attitudes and our lifestyle again. How do we keep that feast? By the way, we live our life. We live holy and pure lives. Back to Exodus chapter 12. Let's move on a little bit here. Verse number 12. Lord tells Moses here, he's given him instruction regarding the Passover. He says, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where ye are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. Ye shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. Even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. And whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And in that day there shall be an holy convocation," that means a day of rest. "And in the 7th day there shall be an holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them, save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. And ye shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. For in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall ye observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at even, ye shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Ye shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations shall ye eat unleavened bread." You get the idea here that he doesn't want them to have leaven. Okay? And why is that? When we look through the Bible and we see leaven being mentioned, is it ever in a good context? Never. It's always a representation of evil, sin, error, false doctrine, hypocrisy, all those things. It is never in a good light. And so this is the picture for them. This is to be a representation of Christ's sacrifice. That's the picture in the Passover lamb. And then this feast of unleavened bread is a representation of the transformation of life that is supposed to take place as a result of having the blood applied. No leaven, getting the leaven out. Verse 21, "Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said unto them, Draw out and take you a lamb according to your families and kill the Passover. And ye shall take a bunch of hyssop," that's just like a shrub, "and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the 2 side posts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out at the door of his house until the morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the 2 side posts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not suffer the destroyer to come into your house to smite you." Now I want you to notice, we're going to come back to this, but there are 2 individuals, I guess you could say, that are passing through Egypt together. The Lord and the destroyer. Okay? So there's 2 of them coming through. Now, let's just keep reading. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Verse 24, ye shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. And it shall come to pass, when ye be come to the land which the Lord will give you according as he hath promised, that ye shall keep this service. And it shall come to pass, when your children shall say unto you, what mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshipped. Now it's interesting that he adds that little detail, because they hear this instruction. He's got the elders there, and he's giving them instruction on what they're supposed to do with the Passover. And the Lord's going to come through, and he's going to deliver us. He's going to kill the firstborn, and we're going to go out into the land. And then it says, people bowed their head and they worshipped. Now that should be our response, should it not be, to the Word of God? It is that we worship the Lord. But here in a couple chapters, is that going to be their attitude? No, it's so quickly they forget. And we're not like that. We're not like that at all. But I notice here in your notes, so this is the Passover, and we see later that this was an ordinance, that this ordinance was for Israel and not for the Gentiles. So he's going to tell them later, your servants in your household, because if they are actually a bond servant, they would be considered part of the house. But he says a hired servant and a foreigner is not allowed to partake of this. So this is something strictly for Israel. But now notice, who is this destroyer that's going to come through with the Lord? Because the Lord says, I'm going to come through, and when I see the blood, I will not allow the destroyer to go in. Who is this? Well, let's look at a few verses here. So here we're introduced to the destroyer, and the destroyer is the one who's going to come through, and he's going to kill the firstborn. Okay, let's look at some verses. Keep your place here. We're going to look at these. Let's go to Numbers. Numbers chapter 14. And the destroyer shows up a few times in the Bible. Numbers 14. Now, there in Exodus, when he talks about the destroyer, he also refers to it being a plague of some kind. Now, it's interesting because here in Numbers, the people murmured against the Lord, and the Lord started killing people. Because they were complaining. Now, notice here in verse 36, it says, and the men which Moses sent to search the land, who returned and made all the congregation to murmur against him and bring up a slander upon the land, even those men that did bring up the evil report upon the land, died by the plague before the Lord. So this is interesting. So the Lord sent a plague. Now, it doesn't say specifically what the plague is, but we do find out when we go to 1 Corinthians. Let's go over to 1 Corinthians. So this is that first generation. They've come across the Red Sea. They've seen God's miracles. God's been providing manna. He's turned bitter, poisonous water into sweet water that they can drink. He's delivered them from their enemies, and they come up to the border of the southern border of the Promised Land. They have a deacons meeting and send some spies in instead of just believing God. I'm joking. I got to give them a hard time. And so they come back, and people's heart is turned away from the Lord, and they don't believe the Lord, and so God, because they're complaining, God's going to send a plague. Notice here, chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians, verse 10, Paul admonishes us, neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of who? The destroyer. So what was that plague that God sent through the land that was killing off the Israelites because they were complaining? It was the destroyer. Well, who is this? I'm going to double back on you. Let's go back to Psalm 78. This gives us a little more insight into what's going on. Psalm 78, drop down to verse number 49, right? says, he cast upon them the fierceness of his anger, wrath, and indignation and trouble by sending what? Evil angels among them. Oh, no, this gets us a little bit closer to what's going on. Now, let's jump over to Revelation. Revelation chapter 9. Now, Revelation chapter 9 is looking ahead in the future from where we're at right now to an event that takes place during the tribulation period, the Great Tribulation. Notice here, chapter 9, verse 1, says, fifth angel sounded, I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and upon them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God on their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion, when he stingeth a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle. And on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the face of men. And their hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron. The sound of their wings was as the sound of many chariots, of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions. And there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. Now watch this. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek hath his name Apollyon. Now, anybody want to take a wild guess what Abaddon and Apollyon translate to in English? The destroyer. This is the destroyer. Let's look at one more passage here. I lied. Sorry, two more. Just real close, though. Let's back up to 2 Peter, and then I can explain how this works. 2 Peter chapter 2, and verse number 4. 2 Peter 2:4 says, If God spare not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved unto judgment. And then in Jude, I'll just read it here real quick. Jude 6, parallel to this, but gives us just a slight bit more detail. He says, verse 6 here, The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Now, let me just kind of run through the scenario here a little bit, how this works. So, at the creation, we know sometime shortly after the creation, Lucifer falls, right? Satan falls, and he goes from being a heavenly, beautiful heavenly being to being a fallen angel. And he falls. God casts him down from heaven. Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, we have the fall of Lucifer. With him comes a third of the heavenly host. His tail draws a third of the stars of heaven down to the earth. Now, those devils running around the earth, and a portion of them, of some kind, we don't know which portion or how many there is a portion of them that was somehow involved in the incident that was going on with the sons of God and daughters of men in Genesis chapter 6. Somehow they were influencing that whole thing that brought about the great depravity that led to the flood. As a result of that, and what Peter and Jude are referring to is, as a result of that, God took that particular group of those fallen angels, bound them in chains, and he cast them into the bottomless pit. Not into hell, but into the bottomless pit. Bottomless pit, I guess you could say, is kind of maybe a section of hell. You know, you have, in the Old Testament, you have paradise on one side, that's the air-conditioned section. Then you have the bottomless pit, this great gulf that's fixed. And then on the other side, you have the tormenting, burning hell. And so this bottomless pit is where Apollyon, the destroyer, the leader of this group of angels, was bound and cast with them. And it says God has reserved them for judgment and for the judgment of the great day. Now what we see in Revelation taking place is that God has allowed that bottomless pit to be open and for those angels with Apollyon to come out to torment the earth. Well, that's not the first time that's going to happen. It happened here in Egypt. And so as God is coming through, apparently, he opens up that bottomless pit and brings Apollyon out, and he goes through Egypt with him. And they go house to house, all the way through Egypt, and wherever there was not blood, Apollyon destroyed. And then wherever there was blood, God took that leash and jerked it back. That one's not yours. That one's mine. When the children of Israel complained in the wilderness and God sent the destroyer to destroy the murmurers, Apollyon was there. We see a couple other instances throughout the Old Testament in which this takes place. So notice here in your notes, in this red box, the destroyer, here back in Exodus chapter 12, the destroyer is an angel of death that is kept in the bottomless pit for times of judgment. And I don't know that that's necessarily even done, like God never does that. There's probably times since the time of Christ in which great death has taken place because God has allowed Apollyon out of the bottomless pit to execute that judgment. Come back here, let's look at the Exodus, the actual event itself. Exodus chapter 12, so all that's leading up to it. So God comes through with the death angel. Notice here, chapter 12, verse number 29. It came to pass that at midnight, the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, and the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne, unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. Now, it's interesting, because Egypt doesn't die out. So, you have Pharaoh, he's going to die. He's going to die soon. And we know this because the firstborn of Pharaoh is already seated on the throne. So he's acting as vice-regent at that period of time. That firstborn is going to die. But he has a brother. And it's actually kind of funny. Because, the Sphinx there in Egypt, in archaeological research, they found an inscription between the feet, or between those legs or whatever, of the Sphinx. And it has an encryption on there, writing on there, of the other son of Pharaoh after his brother died. And supposedly, and this is kind of how he writes it, that as he was walking through the desert one night, this head of the Sphinx came to life and spoke to him and talked about how the gods had ordained him to be the next Pharaoh of Egypt. And that's pretty convenient. And who's going to say otherwise, right? And so that's how Egypt continued to go on. Well, verse 30 here, Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, Rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord as ye have said. Also, take your flocks and your herds, as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people. They want the people gone too. Like, you guys have done nothing but torment us. Get out of here. They were urgent upon the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We be all dead men. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up in their clothes upon their shoulders. And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver, jewels of gold, and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required. And they spoiled the Egyptians. Now, that's an important detail. And they've been slaves for 400 years, so they don't have anything, for one, because they're going to get out in the wilderness. They're going to make this golden calf. Where did the gold come from? It came from the Egyptians. They're going to, when they do the tabernacle later, they're going to overlay everything with gold. Where does that gold come from? It comes from here. But another reason this is important is because back in Genesis chapter 15 and verse 14, when God is confirming the Abrahamic covenant with Abraham, he says, your descendants are going to go into Egypt for 400 years, and when they come out, they're going to come out with great substance. See, the reason Moses adds this detail here is to show that God is in fact fulfilling his covenant with Abraham. This is all based on the Abrahamic covenant. Now, let's notice here. So, notice here in your notes, the Lord led 600,000 men out of Egypt. We'll read that in just a second here. This included an unknown number of women and children. We also see that a mixed multitude, that means some Egyptians and some people from other nations are coming out with them. And the official deliverance from Egypt comes at the Red Sea crossing. So let's notice here, verse 37. Children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men beside children. So we have men, 600,000. Now that's not including women, and he notes in particular that's not including children. So estimates are that there's upwards of 2 million people making this journey. So this is quite the parade that's going on here as they're leaving. It says, and a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle. Now, drop down here to verse number, where am I at? Let's jump over, actually. So they're going out. Now they're going to cross the Sinai Peninsula. Go over to chapter 13, verse 17. Now, another thing we need to understand here is that when they come out of Egypt, when they're told to go, they're not just, they don't leave the city and then there's the beach. Okay, there's a long trip that they take. If you notice here, actually, if you want to go ahead and turn to the second sheet there, I have a map here of the Exodus. Now, I don't know that this map is 150% accurate, but I can guarantee you it's about 99% accurate, and it's probably the only accurate map that you're going to get. So I'm using, right here I have the Ryrie Study Bible, and it has a little picture in it of the Exodus. Probably most of your Bibles have maps in the back. And Ryrie is the only one that gets it close. At least he has them crossing the Red Sea, but he has them crossing in the wrong place. Because you notice here in your map, if you Michigan, we do like a high five to tell people where we're at. If you want to talk about the Red Sea, you do a peace sign, and you got a picture of the Red Sea. And each one of those fingers there that you see are two gulfs. One is the Gulf of Suez, that's the one on the left. The other one on the right is the Gulf of Aqaba. Now, Ryrie has them crossing the Gulf of Suez. They're on the left. The problem with that is the Sinai Peninsula at that time was part of Egypt. So if they crossed there, all that they did was go from one part of Egypt into the other part of Egypt. I think the point of this whole thing was to get them out of Egypt. So that's an error. But you notice here, they actually crossed at the Gulf of Aqaba. And there's textual evidence for that, and there's archaeological evidence for this, that they crossed that Sinai Peninsula. Now, that's 200 miles that they crossed. This took a few days. You got 2 million people trying to cross the desert. They have animals. They have a whole load of money that they're carrying as well. They have carts and buggies. And they've got children. And I'm sure they have elderly people. You can only go as fast as the slowest person in the group. So this takes them, if you were to go at a fast-paced walk, nonstop, it would take at least 2 days. This trip probably takes them about a week to get across here with all those people. And so they come across there. So Pharaoh has a little bit of time to think about what's going on. And over the course of this trip, there are outposts, Egyptian outposts. There's fortresses where they have guards that are watching. So no doubt, those people, as they see Israel come across, they're like, well, we need to go check and make sure. Are they supposed to be doing this? And so word's getting back to Pharaoh. Now, Moses makes note of the fact that they do not go by way of the Philistines. So they don't take the northern route that would take them across the Mediterranean Sea. It would only be a few days for them to get from Egypt then and get into Israel. They go, because that would take them into another country, and then there would be nothing Pharaoh could do at that point. But this route here, it has them going down through a valley. It's actually what's called a wadi, which is where you have a riverbed that dries up in the dry season, but then the water coming down off the mountains and stuff like that and the hills all pools in there, and so you have like a stream or a river that runs through there. Well, they come through this wadi right down here to a place by a fortress called Migdol. And you see in that little square in the upper right corner there that there's a beach there. And there's a path that goes back through there, and it's all cliffs on both sides of the path that they would have come through. And once you get to the beach, it's all cliffs and then sea. And we're not going to read through this whole thing. I want to, but we're not going to do it today. So what we'll do, we'll stop there. Man, I try. Every week I try to get through it, but we'll stop there. And then we'll pick this up next week. Anybody have a question on anything? The blanks that we went over, everybody get their blanks? Okay. All right, you're dismissed.